Derek, welcome to the podcast. I am so thrilled to have you here. For our listeners at Diverse Jewish Books, Behrman House and its imprint Apples and Honey Press are absolute pillars. We have all grown up or are raising our children on these stories, and you are stepping into a massive 100-year plus legacy as you acquire the company from the Behrman family. With your veteran background at Holiday House and Peachtree and Bloomsbury, we're just so curious to hear from you about your vision for this next century of Jewish storytelling.
Well, thanks, Lauren. Thanks for having me. I appreciate being here, and I also appreciate how you like really soft pedaled the pressure aspect of this. It's nothing at stake. It's all fine.
I am so happy to have you here. And in particular, you just bring a tremendous amount of experience in the publishing industry to this role. You've had leadership roles at some of the most respected houses in the industry. What was it about Behrman House specifically that made you want to move from general manager to now owner?
You know, it's I mean, publishing, as you know, is really a people business, and so you have a lot of connections and publishing friends, and you're talking to people. And I was having lunch with David Behrman and Vicky Weber. Gosh, more than a year ago, a year and a half ago, I suppose. And we were kind of talking about what was happening at our respective houses and thoughts for the future and that kind of thing. And David said, well, Vicky and I are thinking about retiring. And I said, oh, wow, what's going to happen at Behrman House? And we talked for a while. And toward the end of the lunch, David said, well, I haven't talked to Vicky about this, but maybe you should buy Behrman House. And I was kind of blown away because, three generations of Behrman, so many amazing contributions to Jewish culture and literature, and such a legacy. And you've noticed my last name's not Behrman, so it took a while to kind of think it through and to talk it through. And David and Vicky are just so smart, intelligent, good people, and really took the time to think it through with me and figure out if it was right for us, for the house, for the team here, because it's not just me. There's a fantastic team that creates the books, and it's about that team continuing and being able to do what they do really well.
You just mentioned that the house has been in the Behrman family for 3 generations, which is incredible. What has the transition been like for you? And what is the most important piece of the Behrman, let's call it the Behrman legacy, that you feel like you've been tasked with protecting
Mm.
here?
Well, yeah, there's so much. I think the transition piece has been really seamless. David and Vicky have been generous with their time and their knowledge and their connections, and have done everything they can to help me get to know Behrman behind the scenes. And from the very beginning, we went together to the ARJE conference in February in Minneapolis, and met a lot of educators and talked with them about what they were looking for from Behrman House, and what they liked, what could be better. And they've introduced me to educators at local temples and synagogues, where we've been able to go and do school visits and hear from teachers about how they're using the materials, and just kind of be a fly on the wall and see how students are interacting with the book. So that whole transition, the knowledge transfer, the kind of generosity that they've both shown in terms of this transition has been fantastic. And in a way, that's part of the legacy that is so important to preserve, is those relationships. The deep connection between Behrman House and educators and the students that are using our materials to prepare mostly for their B'nai mitzvahs.
You've said in the past that you believe in the power of books to educate, transform, and enlighten. In your own life, has there been a specific book or Jewish story that has shaped how you see the world?
I was thinking about this question, and so there may be 3 books that I wanted to just touch on really briefly. The The first is Where the Wild Things Are. And, I think it's such a amazing book, and it holds up so well over time. Because there's so much that happens in imagination in that book, and there's so much that happens in terms of, there's an off-screen parent who is frustrated with Max, and sends him to his room without his supper and doesn't tolerate his bad behavior, and yet at the same time leaves the supper at the very end. And there's kind of a grace and understanding from the parent in that book that Sendak really like pushes the boundaries of what a picture book can be and sort of the universe of that picture book. So, and I think the last page turn is just brilliant, where you turn the page and it says, and it was still hot. And, there's no art. It's just a blank page with those words, and boom, it's just like such a great ending to a book. And so that was a book that I loved as a kid, and, kind of makes me think about what can you do with a picture book, to convey that kind of richness of meaning beyond just the text. So it's the text, the art, the page turn. How does that hit a kid who's then going to read that book over and over again? And importantly, how does it hit the parent who has to read that book over and over again? Having read lots of books to my kids, there's nothing worse than a book, where you just have to, like, your kid loves it, and it's like, okay, can you read that again? Yes, I will. And mostly, for me, it was the superhero books. Like, oh my gosh, do we have to read another Spider-Man? Okay. So things you do for your kids. A more serious book, and this was, kind of going from younger to older. Maus by Art Spiegelman was probably the first graphic novel that I read, and just kind of blew me away with how it's how he tells such a difficult story with the art, but then also breaks the fourth wall all the time. And there's this kind of conversation about how hard it is to do this comic, this drawing and this cartooning, and how hard it is to pull out the story. And yet he's putting the story on the page. And, again, it's one of those books that pushes boundaries of what a book can do. And probably the last book is a book that I tried to read many, many, many times and failed many, many, many times. And finally, in college, took a seminar, and the book was James Joyce's Ulysses. And I took a seminar from a kind of experimental author, Gilbert Sorrentino. And there's two things about that. One is the book, one of the main characters is a non-practicing Jew in Dublin in 1904, really an outsider. But Joyce gets into his day by day or minute by minute thoughts and feelings and how he goes through his life. And it's such again, it's a groundbreaking book that pushes the boundaries of what an author can do with character and with literature. And alongside that, Sorrentino was a big advocate of the small publisher, and really felt like a small press is where innovation happens and where risks can be taken. And that always stuck with me, and it led me to my first publishing job. I was an English major. I was not super career focused. I'd love to read books. And, I was like, oh, and at that time, the Career Center didn't like line you up with the next big job. It was kind of like there were binders and you opened them up and it was like, okay, yeah, I guess you could apply to this job that was sent here, months ago, and there were no publishing jobs. So I was in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I found North Point Press, which was a really well-regarded small house, about 15 people, and ended up there. And that connection through books into the business of publishing is really, part of the influence of Ulysses for me.
You did not set the bar low there with these groundbreaking or boundary pushing books here.
Well, it's like as an English major, you tend to like, I didn't trot out Milton, so I think you're in good shape.
It's also clear you have such a deep personal respect for where Behrman House has been, what the Behrman family has done with this publishing house. And as an industry veteran and hearing the feedback that you did here at the conference and beyond, I imagine that you're also looking at where the publishing house can go, especially in terms of reaching readers who may not yet have a Behrman House book on their shelves.
What do you mean they don't have one of our books?
I certainly do, and we have many here. But if there were someone that might not, and I don't know any that do, but I would love to understand. Let's talk a little bit about this mainstream
Uh-huh.
crossover for Behrman House. Behrman House has an incredible reputation, a powerhouse reputation, especially in the Jewish world. And many trade authors want to see their books on the front tables at Barnes and Noble or in local indie bookshops.
Hmm.
What is your strategy for getting Behrman House titles into more secular and mainstream retail spaces?
Yeah, and I think that's a good thought and has kind of a complicated answer. And because Behrman House is our education brand for the most part, and that's really educational books for kids, and to a lesser extent, over time, it's also been a home for nonfiction for adults, and in fact historical fiction. As a Driven Leaf is a kind of seminal book, historical novel that was just released again about a year ago with a new foreword. So Behrman House is one thing, and our connection there is really to educators, and it's an education business in a lot of ways about how do kids and adults learn. And so for that part of the business, it's really about connecting to educators, educational directors, and people that use the books and can give us feedback about what they need. Apples and Honey Press is, of course, much more of a trade opportunity. It's very tightly focused on Jewish content and Jewish influenced books, um, and it has opportunities to go into the trade. And so over time, and really, I'm building on what David and Vicky started. Is we're now distributed by Two Rivers Press or Two Rivers Distribution from Ingram, so they're able to reach all the retailers, all the channels, and part of our role is to really work with them to get our books into those channels. We recently hired Michelle Montague as our head of sales and marketing. She's got deep experience in both children's and adult marketing. She was at Walker Books Group, Abrams, Simon and Schuster. So she really understands the breadth of what we can do to reach a market differently. And some of our books won't travel into Barnes and Noble or onto the front table, but lots of indies support Jewish books, and lots of indies are interested in what we have to offer. So we're going to continue to work with Two Rivers to get us into those channels. We'll be exhibiting at ALA and at Children's Institute next year, as well as some selected bookseller conferences. So, we're expanding the reach that we have to meet with people, to meet with booksellers, librarians, influencers around the children's world.
I think it was in the publisher's weekly announcement of acquiring Behrman House, that it mentioned that you had plans to explore new markets and go from strength to strength, which many authors and illustrators in the community were like, what does it mean that there are going to be new markets, and how does that impact the Jewish community that currently is such a pillar for Behrman House and Apples and Honey's Press? So what is, help enlighten us, please tell me what that means. Does that mean reaching more secular audiences? Is that international? Is that different genres like young adults or graphic novel? I'm just throwing things out there to see if it sticks. What does new markets and strength to strength mean to you?
It's some of you got quite a few of them. So the first thing is, and this was already in process. So this is something that David and Vicky and I talked about during the transition and prior to, is Apples and Honey Press is just publishing its first YA novel. It's gotten really nice reviews. It's Sharon Reese Baker's Last Days in Moab. Historical novels set on the banks of the Jordan River 3,000 years ago, and really excited about that. We've got a literary middle grade novel coming in the fall, The Singer of Tarazan, which is based on the children's opera. and set in occupied Czechoslovakia in 1944. We've got a literary novel in verse coming, I think, next spring, based on the Kindertransport. And we're looking at expanding up from children's or picture books into middle grade and young adult. So that's part of the new market. The other opportunities are things that Ingram is helping us with. So we've got now distribution into the UK, Australia, Canada, of course. We're able to reach a broader market, and we're able to use Ingram's technology like print on demand to, especially for educational books, to make them more easily available for our partners in the UK and Australia. They don't have to wait for books to ship from the US in order to serve their communities. We're releasing our first paperback list in spring of 27, and that'll be all picture books to start out with, but in time we'll do some, bring some middle grade in there. We're making more ebooks available for our kids list. So we'll probably have about 30 ebooks available by the end of the year. We hadn't done that before. And there's definitely a library and institution market, school market for that, and kind of general public schools. And we're looking to reach the educational distributors that reach public schools, outside of the Jewish education market. So there's a lot going on with just expanding the reach of what we do. And maybe to speak to the unspoken question, which is, will Apples and Honey Press start to publish secular books? No, that's not the goal. Our goal is really for Apples and Honey Press to be the home for Jewish creators, the home for Jewish kids and families, and for the home for Jewish stories. And, over time, I think that Apples and Honey Press, we have great editors and, people that really care about good stories. And we've kind of pushed the boundaries out a little bit about what is a Jewish kids book. And we don't want to push that too far into the secular market with Apples and Honey Press. We want to really focus on that list and making sure that it delivers what families expect from us. That's not to say that we might not do secular books in the future. It just wouldn't be as part of Apples and Honey Press, and it wouldn't be as at a cost to Apples and Honey. So, our goal is really to, as I said, our mission there is to serve the Jewish family and kids and their parents, or kids and their adults, I should say, not just parents.
That's I think that far exceeds what I had maybe hoped to get as an answer for this new markets and strength to strengths question. Thank you. And I'm excited to see where things go.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I think there's, like I said, the team here has done such an amazing job in publishing, and they make such great connections with authors and the community. I just feel like there's a lot more we can do together.
So market reach is one thing, but the soul of these books is so much about identity in some ways. And unsurprisingly, at the Diverse Jewish Books podcast, we think a lot about what it means to tell a truly diverse Jewish story today. So I would love to ask you a couple questions about that. And it sparks in some ways because you just talked about the new books that are coming for a slightly older audience. And there's some a lot of historical context in what you just shared. And same thing with like Last Days in Moab too. As you think about Jewish joy versus history, are you looking to lean into what's more contemporarily defined as Jewish joy narratives? Do you still see a strong path for historical books and holiday-focused titles? Can you talk to me about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, if you look at our picture book list, you'll see lots of books that are about Jewish joy, whether it's My Body Can or, the adorable kittens from Purim time. So that's always been part of our DNA here is joy as part of the experience. And, not everything is about history and past. It's really looking forward about, what do families need today and what kind of families are there and what are the diverse families that enjoy our books and will get something out of our books. I think the interesting thing for me with Apples and Honey Press, or one interesting thing, is it's really a values-driven publisher. When we are acquiring books, we're looking, number one, at what are the values expressed in the books. how do those speak to the community that we're serving? And then secondly, is what kind of diversity is included in the book? And is that a diversity of family, diversity of race, diversity of Jewish experience? So how do we balance those things within the list so that we are giving as complete a picture as we can, given that we're also a small publisher? And I'd say, the third thing that we really look at is the social emotional learning component. What, without the book being didactic or preachy, is there something bigger in the book that's meaningful, that makes the book resonate with families?
As you talk about these different criteria that you're looking for, what stories are you hoping to see more of in your inbox?
Good stories, good stories. It's and it's not really my inbox. It's Dina's inbox. Dina Neusner is our executive editor, and she's fabulous. She's been at Behrman House for 18 years. Uh, which is really an achievement, and she's made it. A lot of the publishing here is reflective of her taste and her vision. And then with her is Debbie Cohen, who's an author, a rabbi, a bookseller. I don't know what she can't do, but I haven't found it yet. But so they're really looking. It's their inbox, and they're really looking for books that give a different lens and different perspective on the experience of being Jewish in America and in the world. And so if you look, in our recent list, we'll have Sali and the Elephant, which is a B'nai Israel folktale from India with Siona Benjamin illustrating. It looks like it's going to be fabulous. We have an upcoming book about set in Iran. We have another historical picture book set in Tunis. Another one focused on a blind Ethiopian Jewish marathon runner in the Paralympics. So, we definitely are looking at different ways to tell a story and different stories that make a difference to our readers.
Are there specific, as you think about what stories that they might additionally want to see in their inbox, are there specific Jewish cultures or identities that you wish were more spotlighted in your upcoming catalogs?
I think we're doing, as I just kind of went through some of the things we're doing, I think we're doing a relatively good job of capturing diversity in the catalog. The one thing we were talking about the other day is, I'm remembering the conversation. We have books with a diversity of children, books with a diversity of races, books with a diversity of backgrounds and experience. We don't really have too many books we do have a couple, I think, with two dads. I don't know if we have any with two moms. I don't know if we have any with non-binary parents, clearly adoptive parents. So, kind of thinking about the broader experience of, what is a family and how do families form today. We've heard, some of that feedback on the education side where, our life cycle books have been around for a while and they need some updating to really reflect, today's Jewish families.
Not to put a plug in for a book on your current catalog, but I noticed that Zoe Zumbeck
Yes.
does have two dads in it. So an amazing book that just came out.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I think it's the two moms is what we're looking for, if I remember right.
So moving these stories into the mainstream, it's an important goal. It's something that, I think as a Jewish author myself and a parent that reads these stories to children, there's something universal in the Jewish experience, in the Jewish values that we think could have broader appeal. And obviously, a huge part of that reach happens in the world of children's literature, not just in the educational market. And children's literature happens to be a lot of what your background is in. And so I'd love to spend a minute talking about the business of children's literature here. And so you're bridging two very different models with the educational side, selling to schools and synagogues, and then the consumer trade side, the selling to bookstores and beyond. How do you plan to use the strengths of Behrman House's educational side to fuel the commercial success of your authors, or are those distinct?
Yeah, you mentioned in the intro that I, worked with Bloomsbury and Walker Books Group and so on. I also worked at McGraw-Hill as with a big education publisher, and Bloomsbury Academic also had an education side of things. So, I'm pretty familiar with both the education market and the trade market. And for us at Behrman House, they are somewhat distinct. They're a very different audience in the sense of what we're trying to accomplish with the education list versus what we're trying to accomplish with the trade list, which is largely Apples and Honey Press. So I think where it helps is certainly the credibility aspect of bringing in Jewish authors into Apples and Honey Press. They know that we have a deep understanding of the Jewish market from kindergarten up. On the commercial side of things, I think it's really about focusing. I'm not sure there's as much crossover as there could be. The opportunities are just so different for the trade books and how you reach your audience, through retail or online or specialty markets versus a very defined education market. Where I think we have opportunities in some ways is more on the adult side of things, where we're publishing a book this fall called Spiritual Belonging by rabbis Ben Spratt and Josh Stanton, which it's a survey of 40 different religious and faith leaders who are revitalizing the practice of religion, whether it's Judaism or Christianity or Buddhism or Hinduism or Jainism, and how that impacts people's lives. And so we have a chance to both move that into more of a trade market, even though it kind of comes from the Behrman House education side.
And when you think about, so we talked about identity, we've talked about bridging the trade and educational markets. When you think about the perfect Apples and Honey book, no pressure, the absolute perfect Apples and Honey book, kind of identity aside, but you've mentioned some like incredible books. I don't know if you're looking for the next Where the Wild Things Are, but what does it look like in terms of tone and character? Tell us about the kind of story that you want to see.
I mean, first speaking on kind of a general level, I mean that I really enjoy books that, as you know now, push the boundaries of what a book can be, that are clever, smart, can be read over and over again, and you can discover something new each time you do it. I think you can. This book is probably a great example of what an ideal Apples and Honey Press book could be, if there is such a thing. I mean, because we are looking at a diversity of different kinds of books. But what's great about My Body Can and really fun is that if you read the text alone, you wouldn't know necessarily that it's a Jewish book, but the art combines to, and it doesn't even say anything about holidays. It doesn't say about what the events are, but as you read it, you kind of discover through the art that it is a Jewish book, and it is Jewish content, and and it's really clever in that way. And even if you turn over onto the back of the book, there's a it's like the text almost continues, with my body can reach, my body can look, my body can sit and read this book.
It's very clever.
Yeah. So I really like that. I mean, and the other thing that I find, really appealing, and I'd like to see in Apples and Honey Press books, are books that really have an emotional impact. So, I remember, at Holiday House when we published Watercress, reading that manuscript for the first time just like blew me away. And I had to present it to librarians, and I could hardly get through it because it just like it hits you so powerfully about the emotions in that book. And so, having that kind of resonance, I don't think every picture book should, drive you to tears, but there's something about a book that has real meaning that then you hope is going to be on the shelves for 10, 15, 20, 50 years.
For the illustrators, Watercress is an amazing book. For the illustrators listening, how much does the look and the feel of Apples and Honey Press change under your leadership? Is there a specific aesthetic shift that you're thinking about to compete with mainstream children publishers? And My Body Can is a fascinating example where you do have the timeline of Jewish holidays throughout the year in the illustrations and not in the text. It is beautifully done. Tell us what you want to see in terms of the aesthetics generally.
Yeah, and again, I want to say it's not just what I want to see; it's what the team wants to see, and what we do together. And a lot of this direction has been happening, and I guess my role is to encourage it and kind of incubate and help it along. But I think if you looked at the early days of Apples and Honey Press, it tended to be very simple illustrations, almost cartoony, and we've really moved to a variety of art styles and to richer art, and not such clearly digital only art. So much more texture, much more interest in the visuals, and I think that's it's such a critical part of a picture book. Melding the art and text together to tell the story. That that's what. For me, that's what's really satisfying about a good picture book. And, I hope that that's something that we can continue to develop here and do more of.
I have no doubt that the listeners here are going to be very inspired by that broad vision. And then for the authors, illustrators, and agents in the audience, because there will be many listening to this, I would love to also hear a bit about how that vision translates into the actual work of making the books. So let's talk for a minute about the professional side of
Mm-hmm.
things. So the industry these days just feels so obsessed with discoverability.
Mm-hmm.
How do you plan to, maybe the word modernize is not the right word because I think Behrman House and Apples and Honey Press does an amazing job of this already. But what do you plan to do with the marketing and metadata side of the business to help make these books findable, discoverable by librarians and parents who aren't already so clued into the Jewish specific book market?
I mean, I think that's just a critical question. And, first of all, before we get to metadata or websites and that kind of stuff, which is important, I mean, I think discoverability often happens at an indie bookstore. And so, if somebody is able to come in and talk to a bookseller and they know our books, and you say, I'm looking for a book about, and they, oh, I know just the thing, and offer an Apples and Honey Press book, that's the best kind of discoverability for us. Probably the second best is recommendations from parents and readers on blogs and social media, where of course we're encouraging people to talk about the books they love. So there's the human aspect of all this before we get down into the BISAC codes and keywords. But BISAC codes, keywords, metadata, of course, are critically important for online discovery. And, that's something that I think Two Rivers has been very helpful with in terms of helping the team here understand the importance of it, and how we create better descriptive copies so people really understand what the book is when they come across it online. We've been having a discussion about BISAC codes. For those people who don't know a lot about BISAC codes, it's really how you might think about it as a shelving category. It's a way you categorize books and they get sorted online or presented online in part based on that category. There's only a handful of Jewish specific BISACs. So how can we as an industry work to expand that? So, it's not just Jewish holidays or Hanukkah and Passover and that's it, or Jewish general. But there's really in the kids section, that there's really more that ties into what our books are about. So enriching the metadata, really working on it, making sure that we come up in search either organically or through marketing, are all things that we're thinking about. We've modernized our website a little bit to improve the search on the website. We now can take pre-orders. We can sell ebooks. There's a lot that we can do on our own website to help elevate discovery of the books that we publish. And because it ultimately, and you're kind of getting it doesn't matter how good the book is if nobody knows about it. So we really want to make sure that people find our books when they're looking for what they need.
Incredible. And again, like very excited to see this happen. For these, if all of this is implemented, the books become more discoverable. It's incredible the effort in the industry to try, change those BISAC codes and actually diversify how you can search for these Jewish books and make it more specific to the experience in the book. How will this change the actual experience of authors or illustrators signing with you compared to in years past? What is the implication of this?
Well, I think that the first thing I would say is that the experience, I believe, and from talking to authors as I came in on this transition, I believe the experience for authors at Behrman House is really, really good. There's very so much respect for the editorial team and how they work with the art and the manuscripts. And of course, great affection for everybody here at the house and connections. So, talking with an author who really appreciates the intimate and boutique experience of publishing with a small publisher, that's what you get if you publish with us versus Random House. And that experience won't change. What, if anything, it should get better as with Michelle on board, we're able to really get more specific marketing campaigns and broader marketing campaigns for each book that helps them reach more readers. Because at the end of the day, if we're publishing a story and the author's invested in it and the artist is invested in it, we want it to reach the broadest audience possible. And that's really what the goal is to put our books in the hands of more readers that will appreciate and love the books that we do. And that's really that's why you go through BISAC codes or keywords or metadata, is to say, how do we get this book in the hands of a reader who needs it?
I was recently talking with an author who's published with Apples and Honey Press, and what they said to me was it was their first time working with Apples and Honey, and they said it just feels like a warm hug.
Well, that sounds like our job is done, or that our job with that author is done, and maybe is beginning. But it's what we want. We want authors to feel appreciated and part of the family.
I'm not gonna make this mistake again and ask you a question about your editorial vision. I'm gonna ask it about you and Dina and Debbie. But you have seen thousands and thousands of pitches in your decades in the industry. What is the one thing in a manuscript? Maybe one thing is too narrow, but what is something that in a manuscript or a query that makes you and Dina and Debbie say, we must publish this?
I think there's. I appreciate your attention to the team and how we do things. But what's the diversity? How is diversity handled? What is the SEL impact? But beyond all that, it's like, is this a story that needs to be told? Is this a story that has impact? Emotionally, is it clever? Is it funny? Is it something that can be read again and again and will hold up to that? And ideally, you get more out of it as you read it more often. So those are the kind of books that, and you don't always see that in your inbox. I think probably the closest thing that I personally saw was Small in the City, which was a Sydney Smith picture book that's essentially wordless. I think it is wordless. No, there is. Sorry. I'm thinking of the Sidewalk Flowers. But Small in the City really, like, when you read it, you cared about the kid all the way through and what was happening in that story. And so, seeing that in your inbox where you wow, I need to finish this, not just, read the first couple of pages. And, I used to be somebody who finished every single book, no matter what. And in probably the last 10 years, I was just if I don't like it, I'm not finishing it. That's it.
Who has time for that?
Yeah, yeah. But so, it's those kind of books where you really like, wow, this is different. This is something that, I can feel this.
And in the children's industry, can you read it over and over again to your kids?
So true. Yeah. You always have to think about the adults in the equation because, they are buying the books, even though the kids love them, and they do have to read the books at least for a while.
Yes, very true. So, as we start to wrap up this conversation, what is the kind of home that you want Behrman House to be for creators and the team?
Well, I think you kind of put it really nicely already with, a warm hug, in terms of really supporting Jewish creators and Jewish stories and making sure that, we're a very collaborative team here. We really work as a team on the books. And when we publish a book, it's about the whole of house and including the author and artist in that whenever we can. So that's really the goal, is to make this a supportive place for creators and for Jewish creators.
Looking at the long-term horizon here, 5 years from now, that's kind of long term, intermediate term, let's say.
Intermediate, yeah.
When someone pulls a Behrman House book off of a library shelf, and I say Behrman House at
Of
large,
course,
could
yeah.
be Apples and Honey Press. When someone pulls a Behrman House book off of a library shelf, what do you hope that the book says about the state of Jewish life?
Well, first of all, I hope that it's a book that is meaningful in 5 years or 10 years or 15 years. That we don't publish news articles, we publish books that are meant to have an impact in the culture and to be meaningful over time. And so that's kind of the criteria, I would think. What does it say about the culture? I guess it depends on, our goal is not necessarily to voice a specific thing about the culture. It's about to raise author voices that have a perspective. So, again, whether it's the upcoming book, Spiritual Belonging, or, a novel in verse that tells a different kind of story, or a clever picture book. Those are the kind of books that we want to publish, ones that, are meaningful and can last.
And the idea of these authors having a perspective that you want to help elevate and bring out into the world. What is one piece of advice? Closing it question here. What is one piece of advice that you have for an author or illustrator working on a Jewish themed project who isn't sure where it fits in what is undoubtedly a changing market
Mm.
for Jewish works these days?
I mean, fundamentally, it's about just tell a good story. Something that a kid wants to read, that I want to read as a parent, tell a good story first. And if it's a good story, then the rest of it are things that you can work on.
That's it. It just comes down to tell a good story.
I'm afraid so.
It is so encouraging, Derek, to hear your commitment to the creators and the team behind these projects. Thank you for sharing your vision, your transparency, for joining us on the Diverse Jewish Books podcast at the very start of this new chapter.
Thanks, Lauren. It's been a joy to be here. Appreciate it.
Thank you.